They told you that you were sick, that something was wrong with you because you can't stop thinking about it. That goal, that project, that vision that keeps you awake at night while everyone else sleeps peacefully inside their comfortable mediocrity. They called you obsessive as if it were an insult, as if it were a pathology that needed treatment. You need balance. You should relax more. You're taking this too far. It's not healthy to think about it so much. And while they judged you from their ordinary lives, you felt something you couldn't explain to anyone who lives comfortably. That giving up your obsession would mean betraying the very thing that makes you feel alive. Because for you it isn't work. It's purpose. It's not a hobby. It's a calling. It's not something you do. It's who you are when you finally stop pretending to be who others expect you to be. And the most painful part isn't that they judge you. It's that you begin to judge yourself. You start to believe that maybe you really are sick, that maybe you really do need more balance, that maybe you should settle for less intensity, less commitment, less fire. You begin to deliberately extinguish the only flame that keeps you awake. And you call that maturing. But deep down, you know the truth that terrifies you to admit. That when you suffocate your obsession to fit into other people's expectations of mediocrity, you don't find peace. You find slow death, diminished life, a gray existence where every day is exactly the same as the one before. And while you pretend to be balanced, while you act as if intensity were a problem instead of a power, a part of you dies every single day. The part that dreamed big, the part that wanted more, the part that refused to accept the ordinary as destiny. That part is being suffocated, not by your enemies, but by you trying to be reasonable. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the most powerful empire of the known world, wrote something that should shake you to your core. Do not waste the remainder of your life thinking about others unless it is for the common good. Why do you deprive yourself of time to do something else when you have this task in front of you? He was not talking about balance. He was talking about directed obsession, about taking all your fire and focusing it on the one thing that truly matters instead of weakly spreading it across 1,000 things that don't. Because balance is propaganda that keeps the masses satisfied with distributed mediocrity. A little of this, a little of that, never too much of anything. It sounds wise, but it produces exactly what it is designed to produce. Lives perfectly balanced in total mediocrity. Never successful enough to provoke envy. Never failed enough to provoke pity. Exactly average, perfectly forgettable. And if that's what you want, if comfort is your highest goal, then obsession is your enemy. But if something inside you rebels against the idea of an ordinary life, if there is a hunger you cannot satisfy with normal pleasures, if you feel you were designed for something greater than comfortable existence, then obsession is not your disease. It is your only path to the life you actually want to live. Seneca, who could have lived in perpetual luxury, chose to obsess over philosophy. And he wrote something that directly confronts the propaganda of balance. It is not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it. Life is long enough, and it has been given in sufficient measure to accomplish the greatest things if it is used well. But we don't use it well. We fragment it. We distribute it. We balance it across 1,000 mediocre priorities. And at the end of our perfectly balanced lives, we have nothing exceptional to show. Just a life that was a little of everything and a lot of nothing. Epictetus, who lived as a slave before becoming one of the most influential philosophers in history, taught something radical about obsession. If you want something good, get it from yourself, not through balanced distribution of effort, but through total concentration on developing exactly what you need to develop in order to obtain exactly what you want to obtain. That is obsession. And the Stoics practiced it religiously. They didn't call it obsession because the word did not exist with its modern negative connotation. They called it virtue, discipline, duty, purpose. But it was the same thing. Total commitment to something that mattered more than comfort, more than approval, more than balance. What follows are 10 Stoic lessons on obsession as virtue, not as a pathology you need to cure, but as a power you need to embrace. 10 truths that modern culture hides because they keep the masses controlled, comfortable, peacefully consuming, never reaching their real potential. But before you continue, before you discover why obsession is exactly the power you were told to fear, you need to do more than listen passively. You need to declare a specific commitment that you cannot retract when discomfort arrives. Go to the comments right now and write exactly this. My obsession is not my disease, it is my power. Those words are not an empty motivational affirmation you forget in an hour. They are your declaration of war against the propaganda that trained you to fear exactly what could make you exceptional. They are your acknowledgement that you have been dimming your fire so others could feel comfortable with their lack of fire, and that you have decided their comfort is no longer more important than your destiny. Do it now. Pause. Go to the comments. Write, my obsession is not my disease, it is my power. The Stoics understood the power of public declaration. They knew that when you name a truth externally, when you make it visible to others, you create a force that dramatically multiplies your ability to live according to it. Because it is no longer a private thought you can abandon when it becomes inconvenient. It is a public commitment others have seen, and that visibility creates accountability that transforms intention into action. This is not the moment for timidity. This is not the moment for maybe or I'll think about it. This is the moment to decide definitively whether you will continue living by the rules of mediocrity imposed on you, or whether you will finally embrace the only power that guarantees you will live an exceptional life. Total obsession with what truly matters. First Stoic lesson. Obsession is not an illness, it is deliberate discipline. There is a cultural lie you have swallowed your entire life without ever questioning it. The lie that obsession is a loss of control, a pathology, something that happens to unbalanced people who don't know when to stop. But that lie completely inverts reality. Obsession is not a loss of control. It is the most extreme exercise of control that exists. It is taking the 1,000 distractions competing for your attention and saying no to 999 of them. It is taking your finite energy and, instead of weakly spreading it across everything that might matter, concentrating it entirely on the one thing that matters most. That is not a loss of control. That is absolute control exercised with surgical precision. Marcus Aurelius did not become one of the great philosopher emperors of history through balance. He became one through obsession, with Stoic philosophy, with duty, with excellence in leadership. Every night, no matter how exhausted he was from ruling an empire, he wrote his meditations. Not occasionally when he had time, not when he felt inspired. Every night, like a sacred ritual, like a non-negotiable discipline. That is obsession. And that obsession produced Meditations, one of the most influential texts in human history. He wrote something specific that destroys the narrative of balance. Concentrate every minute, like a Roman, like a man, on doing what is in front of you with precise and sincere dignity, with affection, freedom, and justice. Not distribute every minute evenly across many things, but concentrate every minute on what is in front of you. That is the difference between obsession and balanced distraction. Balanced distraction says, a little of this, a little of that, keep all the balls in the air. Obsession says, this one ball matters more than all the others combined, so the rest fall so this one can fly. And that fall is exactly what terrifies ordinary people. But if you let the other balls drop, what will people say? Aren't you being irresponsible? Shouldn't you keep your options open? No, because keeping all options open means never fully committing to any of them. And without full commitment, you never reach excellence. You reach distributed mediocrity, competence in many things, excellence in none. Seneca observed this in the people of Rome who lived fragmented lives. It is inevitable that life becomes weak when it is divided into many parts. Wherever you turn your attention, you cannot devote yourself completely. That is exactly the trap of modern balance. You become incapable of fully committing to anything because you are always partially present in 1,000 things. At work, you think about family. With family, you think about work. In both, you think about the hobbies you should be cultivating to be a well-rounded person. And at the end of the day, you were never fully present anywhere. You were a ghost moving through life without ever fully inhabiting a single moment. That is not a life well lived. It is a fragmented existence that never solidifies into anything meaningful. Obsession is the exact opposite. It is saying, when I am here, I am completely here. Everything else waits or disappears. And that total presence is exactly what produces excellence, not because you work more hours than others, but because when you work, you are fully there. Every neuron focused, every fiber committed, zero fragmentation. Epictetus taught this explicitly to his students. First tell yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you must do. For in nearly everything else we see this. Athletes first choose the sport they want to practice, then they do the work. An Olympic athlete does not balance training with 1,000 other interests. He obsesses over his sport. He eats for that sport. He sleeps for that sport. He constantly thinks about how to improve in that sport. Everything else is secondary or irrelevant. And that total obsession is exactly what produces medalists. No one wins gold medals with a balanced focus. You win gold with total obsession that sacrifices everything else on the altar of excellence in one thing. Now apply that principle to your life. What is your sport? What is the one thing that, if you mastered it completely, would transform your entire life? Not 10 things. One thing. And when you identify that one thing, the question is not, how do I balance this with everything else? The question is, what must I sacrifice to obsess completely over this? Because obsession requires sacrifice. You cannot have everything. You cannot do everything. You cannot be everything. You must choose. And the choice to obsess over something is simultaneously the choice not to obsess over 1,000 other things. Marcus Aurelius chose to obsess over Stoic philosophy and excellent leadership. That meant sacrificing 1,000 pleasures emperors normally enjoyed, not because he was a masochist, but because he made a simple calculation. Those pleasures did not move him closer to who he wanted to be. His obsession did. So he chose his obsession over his pleasures. And that choice, repeated daily for decades, produced one of the most respected leaders in human history. Seneca practiced this as well. He regularly asked himself, "Does this serve my goal of living wisely, or is it a distraction that appears important but is fundamentally irrelevant?" And everything that fell into the second category was eliminated without mercy. Not reduced, not balanced, eliminated, because he had recognized that life is too short to waste on things that do not matter. And most things do not matter once you have clarity on the one thing that matters most. Epictetus concluded this with a radical instruction. If you want to make progress, give up such reasoning as, "If I neglect my affairs, I will have nothing to live on." For it is better to starve free from grief and fear than to live in abundance while troubled. That sounds extreme, but that is exactly the point. Obsession requires a willingness to pay any price to live according to your highest vision, not literally starving, but being willing to sacrifice the comforts that keep most people trapped in mediocrity, being willing to be misunderstood, criticized, called obsessive as if it were an insult, being willing to be alone because your obsession is not shared by people who value balance over excellence, being willing to fail spectacularly while pursuing something great, rather than succeed moderately while pursuing something safe. That willingness is exactly what separates the obsessed from the balanced. The balanced person is not willing to pay those prices, so they never reach what the obsessed reach. And at the end of their perfectly balanced life, they wonder why they never achieved anything exceptional. The answer is simple. Excellence requires obsession, and they chose balance. You cannot have both. You must choose. And culture trains you to choose balance, because balanced people are predictable, controllable, and do not threaten the established order. Obsessed people are unpredictable, uncontrollable, and constantly challenge what is possible. And that makes everyone who chose to conform uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius summarized this perfectly. Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. To be good, in Stoic language, means to be excellent in your chosen virtue. And that excellence does not come from balance. It comes from disciplined obsession that concentrates your entire being in one direction. That is the first lesson. Your obsession is not your illness. It is your only hope for an exceptional life. And the faster you embrace that, the faster you stop wasting energy justifying your intensity to people who will never understand. Because they live in a different world. A world where balance is victory. But you do not belong to that world. You belong to the world where obsession is virtue, and it is time to stop pretending otherwise. Second Stoic lesson. Invisible work builds the visible warrior. There is something everyone sees when they look at an exceptional person. The result. The successful business, the transformed body, the mastered skill, the public recognition. They see the moment of victory, the moment of revelation, the moment when the world finally notices. But they do not see what built that moment. They do not see the 1,000 hours in total darkness, where no one was watching, no one was applauding, no one even knew you were working. They do not see the private failures, the iterations that did not work, the attempts witnessed by no one except you. They do not see the invisible work that built the visible warrior, and that invisibility is exactly where the obsessed are forged. Not on the stage, in the darkness, preparing for the stage. Epictetus, who taught Stoic philosophy to some of the most powerful men in Rome, wrote something that destroys the illusion of instant success. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and ignorant in external matters. Translation: you must be willing to work in private, without external validation, for as long as it takes to develop real mastery. And that time is always longer than you expect, more lonely than you anticipate, more invisible than you comfortably tolerate. But that invisibility is not the problem. It is the process. Because character is not built in public. It is built in private. Discipline is not forged under applause. It is forged in total silence. Obsession does not need an audience to survive. That is exactly the difference between real obsession and the performance of obsession. The performance of obsession needs to document everything, post everything, show everything. Look how hard I work. Look how dedicated I am. Look at my constant effort. That is not obsession. That is a need for validation disguised as hard work. Real obsession works in the dark without needing anyone to know. It works when it would be easier to rest, when no one would notice if you stopped, when there is no immediate reward except knowing that you did the work. Marcus Aurelius practiced this literally. He wrote meditations with no intention that it would ever be published. It was a private journal for himself. He did not write it to impress. He did not write it for an audience. He did not write it for future recognition. He wrote it in total darkness as a private practice of personal philosophy. And that private practice, that invisible work without an audience, produced one of the most influential texts ever written, not because he sought influence, but because he did not. He worked in the dark for the right reason, to become a better version of himself. And when you work for that reason, when your motivation is internal rather than external, your work has a completely different quality. It is not a performance. It is a transformation. Seneca taught this explicitly. Do not concern yourself with being known, but with being worthy of being known. The obsession with being known produces work designed to impress. The obsession with being worthy produces work designed to transform. And only the second kind of work builds something that lasts. The first is a facade that collapses when attention disappears. The second is a foundation that holds no matter who is watching. The question that reveals which one you practice is simple but devastating. Would you still do this work if no one ever knew you did it? If the answer is no, you are working for external validation. If the answer is yes, you are working for internal transformation. And only the second builds a warrior who does not collapse when the applause stops. Epictetus also warned specifically about dependence on external validation. If you look outside yourself, you will be disturbed, because you are waiting for something from others that only you can give yourself. That disturbance is exactly what you feel when your obsession depends on being noticed. You work hard and no one notices. You feel disturbed. You improve significantly and no one recognizes it. You feel frustrated. You reach a private milestone and no one celebrates it. You wonder if it is worth it. And in that moment of doubt, if your motivation was external, you stop. But if your motivation is internal, if you are obsessed with the process itself rather than recognition of the process, you continue. Because invisible work does not need to be seen to have value. It has value because it is transforming you into who you need to be to reach what you want to reach. And that transformation happens entirely in private. No one sees you grow stronger, by resisting the temptation to quit when no one would know you quit. No one sees your discipline solidify by doing the work when it would be easier to postpone it, and no one would notice the difference. No one sees your character forged in the 1,000 microscopic decisions you make in total darkness. But those invisible decisions are exactly what build the warrior everyone will eventually see. Marcus Aurelius wrote something specific about this. What we do in life echoes in eternity. But he could have added, especially what we do when no one is watching. Because actions without an audience reveal who you truly are versus who you pretend to be to impress. They reveal whether your obsession is real or whether it is just well-executed theater. And the difference between the two becomes obvious eventually. Theater collapses under pressure because it has no real foundation. Genuine obsession forged in the dark holds under any pressure because it was built precisely there, in the private pressure of working without validation. Seneca practiced something specific to strengthen his character in private. He deliberately exposed himself to discomforts no one would see. He fasted when he could feast. He slept on the hard floor when he had a luxurious bed. He wore simple clothes when he could dress as the wealthy Roman senator he was. Not because he was a masochist, but because he was training his character in private. He was building a resilience no one would see directly, but everyone would experience indirectly when he faced public adversity. Because he understood something most people ignore. What you do in private determines how you respond in public. If you train discipline only when others are watching, you do not have real discipline. You have a performance of discipline that collapses the moment the audience disappears. But if you train discipline, especially when no one is watching, you build something unbreakable. You build a character that does not need applause to function. And that character is exactly what separates the obsessed who achieve from the obsessed who only talk. Epictetus summarized this with a devastatingly simple instruction. In every action, consider what comes before and what follows, and only then proceed to act. Translation: think about the long-term consequences of your private actions. Every time you choose comfort when you could choose discipline in private, you weaken the character you will need in public. Every time you choose hard work when no one would know you chose the easy path, you strengthen exactly what you will need when it matters. And those moments always come. The moment when you need endurance, when you need unbreakable discipline, when you need strength of character. And in that moment, you either have what you built in the dark, or you discover devastatingly that you only had a performance with no substance. The practice that reveals whether you are building the warrior in the dark is brutally honest. Observe what you do when you are completely alone, when no one can verify whether you did the work, when no one would know if you took the shortcut. Do you do the work anyway? Do you maintain the standards you publicly proclaim? Or do you allow yourself lowered standards because no one will know? If it is the second, you are not building a warrior. You are building an actor. And actors collapse when the role becomes too difficult to perform. Warriors grow stronger because they are not acting. They are. Marcus Aurelius also practiced asking himself specifically about invisible work. Does this bring me closer to the person I have decided to be? Or does it only look impressive to those watching? If an action only had value when it was observed, he avoided it. If an action had value even in total darkness, he prioritized it, because he had recognized that invisible work builds the foundation, and only on a real foundation can you build something that holds when everything else collapses. Seneca closed on this with a specific warning. Judge your progress not by what others see, but by what you know you have conquered in private. That is the true metric of genuine obsession, not how many likes you get documenting your process, but how many private battles you won that no one witnessed except you. How many times you chose discipline over comfort when no one would know the difference. How many invisible hours you invested building a skill that will eventually look like natural talent to those who only see the result. That invisible work, that sacrifice without an audience, that discipline in total darkness, that is exactly what builds the warrior everyone will eventually see. And when they finally see you, when they finally notice the result, they will never truly understand where it came from, because they did not see the invisible work. They only see the visible warrior, and they will assume it was luck, or talent, or favorable circumstances. They will never see the 1,000 hours in the dark when no one was watching and you worked anyway. But you know, and that knowledge is enough, because you did not work for them to see it. You worked to become who you needed to be. And that invisible transformation is exactly the power that obsession unlocks. Third Stoic lesson: sacrifice who you are for who you can become. There is a truth that terrifies you to confront because it involves death, not physical death. Something far more frightening to the ego, the death of who you are now. Because the person you are today, with all your current habits, your familiar comforts, your established patterns, that person cannot reach what you want to reach. If they could, they already would have. So to arrive where you want to go, you must kill who you are and be reborn as who you need to become. And that death is exactly what most people refuse to experience. They prefer to cling to the familiar version of themselves, to the comfortable identity they know, even when that identity keeps them trapped in results they hate. Because the familiar feels safe, even when the familiar is a prison. Seneca wrote something about this that should shake you to your core. We do not dare many things because they are difficult, but they are difficult because we do not dare. And the most difficult thing we do not dare is deliberately killing the version of ourselves that no longer serves us. The you who sleeps in because you need rest. The you who avoids discomfort because you shouldn't push yourself so hard. The you who justifies mediocrity because at least you're trying. The you who postpones what matters because it's not the right moment yet. Every one of those versions of you must die for the version you truly want to be to emerge. And this death is not poetic metaphor. It is a visceral experience of letting go of an identity you have carried for years. It is waking up at 5 in the morning when every fiber of your being screams for you to stay in bed and getting up anyway. It is saying no to social invitations you once accepted automatically because now you have something more important to do. It is cutting relationships you once tolerated because you finally recognize they drain you more than they feed you. It is abandoning the image of yourself you projected to impress others and beginning to live by values that require no one's approval. Each of these deaths hurts because you are killing a part of yourself. But those parts are exactly what keep you trapped. And as long as you cling to them, as long as you refuse to let them go, you remain exactly where you are. Marcus Aurelius faced this constantly as emperor. He could have been the emperor who indulged endlessly in pleasure. That was the easy and expected path. But he deliberately killed that version of himself. He rose before dawn to study philosophy when he could have slept in luxury. He practiced austerity when he could have indulged in excess. He ruled by principles when he could have ruled by impulse. And he wrote something specific about this process of self-transformation. The ability to change your mind and to follow someone who corrects you is freer than persistence in error. He was not speaking about changing superficial opinions. He was speaking about fundamentally changing who you are, when who you are does not lead you to who you want to become. And that change requires the willingness to kill versions of yourself that other people still recognize and expect. Your friends expect you to be who you've always been. That version must die. Your family expects you to maintain familiar roles. Those expectations must die. Your social identity expects you to continue established patterns. That identity must die. And when you begin killing those versions, the people around you react. You've changed. They say it like an accusation, as if change were betrayal, but change is the entire point. You cannot reach where you want to go without changing who you are. Seneca faced this as well when he chose philosophy over political power. His entire previous identity as a Roman senator, as a man of political influence, had to die, and he wrote something specific about that process. Discard what you were, embrace what you can be, and do not look back nostalgically at the version you left behind, because that version was exactly what kept you small. This is the brutal truth. The version of you that everyone knows and loves is often the version that keeps you trapped. It keeps you small because it is comfortable for others, predictable, non-threatening. When you begin to grow, when you begin transforming into something greater, that comfort disappears, and the people who benefited from your smallness will try to pull you back through guilt, criticism, or rejection. Who do you think you are? Why can't you be like before? You're changing for the worse. Every comment is an attempt to preserve the version of you that served them. But you do not exist to serve them. You exist to become your highest version. And that requires sacrificing the lesser versions, regardless of who prefers them. Epictetus taught something radical about this. When you show improvement, some will rejoice with you, but others will mock you. If you want to improve, do not concern yourself with the mockers, because the mockers are often the ones who benefited from your previous version. Your mediocrity made them feel good about their mediocrity. Your transformation makes them uncomfortable with their stagnation. So they try to stop you not because they hate you, but because your growth exposes their lack of growth. And that exposure is intolerable to those who chose comfort over transformation. The practice that reveals which versions of yourself you need to kill is brutally clear. Identify the 3 areas where you consistently fail to achieve what you want. Now ask yourself honestly, which version of me keeps these failures in place? What habit? What belief? What identity? What pattern? That is the version that must die, not gradually, not eventually when I'm ready. Now, through a deliberate decision to kill that pattern and replace it with its opposite. If the failing version wakes up late, the new version wakes up early, starting tomorrow. If the failing version avoids discomfort, the new version seeks discomfort deliberately, starting today. If the failing version justifies mediocrity, the new version demands excellence without excuses. Starting now. These transformations are not comfortable. They are deaths. You are killing patterns you have run for years, identities you have carried for decades, and your brain will resist with everything it has, because change threatens the system that has kept you alive. But that resistance is not a sign you are doing something wrong. It is a sign you are doing something meaningful. Marcus Aurelius also practiced visualizing who he needed to be. Rise every morning, remembering that I am a member of the greater body. I am not here for myself alone, but to serve the whole. That visualization forced him to kill the selfish version of himself every day. The version that wanted comfort. The version that wanted easy pleasures. The version that wanted to avoid difficult responsibilities. Each morning he killed those versions by remembering who he had decided to be, and that constant reminder that daily death of lesser selves is exactly what kept him on the path to greatness. Seneca practiced something similar. Each night he asked himself, "What weakness did you cure today? What vice did you resist? In what way are you better?" He was not asking about external improvements. He was asking about internal deaths of versions that no longer served. What destructive pattern did you kill today? What limiting identity did you release? What lesser version of yourself did you sacrifice? And if the answer was none, he knew he had wasted the day. Because every day, without the death of old versions, is a day without the birth of new ones. And without the constant birth of better versions, there is no transformation, only repetition of patterns you already know do not take you where you want to go. Epictetus closed on this with a devastating warning. If you are not willing to look foolish, you will never achieve anything worth achieving. Because killing old versions of yourself makes you look foolish to those who only knew those versions. Why are you acting differently? What happened to you? You're not the same anymore. Arms say. Each comment is proof that you killed something they recognized. And if you are not willing to endure those comments, if you need everyone to approve of your transformation, you will never transform. Because transformation always confuses and often offends those who benefited from your stagnation. Marcus Aurelius summarized this with final clarity. Accept what nature presents to you. Make yourself worthy of it. And let go of what you no longer need. Letting go of what you no longer need means killing versions of yourself that served you in the past, but obstruct you in the present. The timid you who avoided conflict served you when you were vulnerable. Now it keeps you small. The you who needed constant approval served you when you depended on others. Now it keeps you controlled. The you who justified mediocrity served you when you did not yet know you could reach more. Now it keeps you stagnant. Each of these versions must die for the you that you truly want to be to emerge. And this death is not optional if the obsession is real. Because obsession cannot coexist with versions of yourself designed for comfort. It requires a version of you designed for excellence, and building that version requires killing every lesser one. That sacrifice, that deliberate death of who you are for who you can become, is exactly the price of real transformation. And as long as you refuse to pay it, as long as you cling to familiar versions because death is frightening, you remain exactly where you are. Seneca spoke the final truth about this. It is not that you lack time to transform, it is that you waste the time you have clinging to versions that should already be dead. Those living dead versions are exactly what consume your energy without producing transformation. And releasing them, killing them deliberately, is the most loving act you can perform for yourself. Not because you hate who you were, but because you love who you can become, more than you fear the death of who you are. Fourth Stoic lesson. Discomfort is the price of transformation. There is a cultural fantasy you were sold about success, that if you find your passion, if you do what you love, the work will not feel like work. That the path to greatness is paved with inspiring moments and constant flow. That exceptional people got there because they enjoyed the journey. That fantasy is a comforting lie that keeps millions waiting for inspiration that never comes. Because the truth no one wants to admit is this: the path to anything exceptional is paved with brutal discomfort, not occasional, constant, not temporary until you get past the initial difficulty, perpetual for as long as you pursue excellence. Because discomfort is not a temporary obstacle on the road to greatness, it is the road. Marcus Aurelius, who lived a life of voluntary discomfort despite being emperor, wrote something that destroys the fantasy of comfortable success. Do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one. He was not being a masochist. He was being realistic. He knew that anything worth achieving requires passing through a level of discomfort most people will not tolerate, and that the difference between those who reach greatness and those who do not is not talent, luck, or circumstances. It is tolerance for prolonged discomfort. The Stoics did not merely tolerate discomfort. They actively sought it. They voluntarily practiced deprivation when they could have lived in abundance. Seneca, an immensely wealthy man, practiced living on bread and water for days at a time. He slept on hard floors, wore simple clothing, deliberately exposed himself to cold, not because he was poor and had no choice, but because he was rich and chose discomfort anyway. Why? He wrote the reason explicitly. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse clothing, saying to yourself, "Is this the condition that I feared?" He was training his tolerance for discomfort. Because he had recognized something modern culture hides. Your capacity to tolerate discomfort directly determines your capacity to achieve greatness. Not because suffering itself is virtuous, but because everything exceptional lives on the other side of a discomfort most people will not cross. The transformed body lives on the other side of training sessions that hurt more than you want to endure. The successful business lives on the other side of risks that terrify you to take. Mastery of any skill lives on the other side of thousands of hours of practice that are boring, frustrating, humiliating. And if you cannot tolerate that discomfort, if you need the path to feel good in order to continue, you will never reach what lives on the other side. Epictetus, who literally lived as a slave facing discomfort he did not choose, taught something radical about choosing discomfort voluntarily. Difficulties show what kind of person you are. Therefore, when a difficulty falls upon you, remember that you are like a wrestler whom the trainer has matched with a tough opponent. But he added something even more important. Do not wait for discomfort to arrive. Seek it deliberately, because imposed discomfort builds reactive resilience. Chosen discomfort builds proactive resilience. And only the second prepares you for the battles that actually matter. The specific Stoic practice was simple but brutal. Voluntarily practice what you fear most. Fear poverty? Live with minimal means for a time. Fear rejection? Deliberately expose yourself to situations where rejection is likely. Fear failure? Attempt difficult things where failure is probable. Not to torture yourself, but to strengthen exactly the capacity you need. Because when you practice discomfort voluntarily, when you actively seek it, something transformative happens. You discover that what you feared is not as devastating as you imagined, and that realization destroys the power fear held over you. Marcus Aurelius practiced this specifically with imperial responsibilities. He did not avoid the most difficult tasks, he sought them out. He did not delegate the most complex problems. He confronted them personally. He did not shield himself from discomfort through his position. He met it through his principles. And he wrote something about that process. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Translation: the discomfort you avoid is exactly what you must pass through to reach where you want to go. It is not a separate obstacle from the path. It is the path. And as long as you avoid it, as long as you seek comfortable routes, you remain exactly where you are. Seneca also warned explicitly against the pursuit of constant comfort. A calm sea never made a skilled sailor. You need storms to develop the skill that matters. That is the paradox that destroys the fantasy of comfortable success. The comfort you seek is exactly what keeps you incapable of achieving what you pursue. Because what you pursue requires a stronger version of you, and that version is forged only through discomfort. So, every time you choose comfort over discomfort, you choose stagnation over growth. Not because you are weak, but because you are operating from the false belief that growth should feel good. But growth never feels good. It feels like stretching, like fracture, like death and rebirth. It feels exactly like discomfort. And when you finally accept that discomfort is not a sign something is wrong, but a sign something is working, everything changes. You no longer need the path to feel good in order to continue. You can continue because it feels bad, knowing that this discomfort is precisely the process of transformation. Epictetus taught his students to distinguish between two kinds of discomfort: useful discomfort that moves you toward your goal, useless discomfort that only harms you. Training to the point of muscular growth, useful. Training to the point of destructive injury, useless. Working intensely toward your objective, useful. Working destructively without rest until collapse, useless. Wise obsession distinguishes between the two. It does not seek suffering for its own sake. It seeks growth through calibrated discomfort. And that calibration requires brutal honesty about which discomfort serves you and which merely feeds the ego. The practice that reveals whether you are using discomfort wisely is simple. Every time you face discomfort, ask yourself, is this making me stronger for my goal, or is it only making me suffer so I can feel virtuous? If it is the first, embrace the discomfort fully. If it is the second, release it without guilt. Because useful discomfort is an investment. Useless discomfort is waste. And the wise obsessive invests in the first while eliminating the second. Marcus Aurelius also evaluated his discomfort. Does this difficulty move me closer to the person I have decided to be? If so, it is exactly where I need to be. That simple evaluation separated productive suffering from performative suffering. Productive suffering transforms you. Performative suffering exhausts you. And only the first is worth the price it demands. Seneca concluded with a liberating truth. We suffer not because things are difficult, but because we consider them unbearable. Change your judgment, and you change your experience. The discomfort does not diminish when you change your perspective, but your capacity to move through it multiplies exponentially because you are no longer resisting it as you pass through it. You are accepting it as a necessary cost. It still hurts, but it is clean pain, not suffering contaminated by resistance. And clean pain is tolerable. Resisted suffering is unbearable. That distinction is exactly what allows the obsessive to continue when others stop. Not because they do not feel the pain, but because they do not add resistance to the pain. They accept that discomfort is the price. They pay that price without complaint, and they continue. That acceptance, that willingness to pay the price of transformation in the form of constant discomfort, is exactly what separates pretenders from practitioners. Pretenders want the result without the price. Practitioners accept that the price is non-negotiable and pay it daily. And only practitioners reach what pretenders merely talk about. Fifth Stoic lesson: your desire must burn stronger than your fear. There is a battle being fought inside you constantly, not between good and evil, between desire and fear. The desire for what you want to achieve, the fear of what it might cost you to achieve it. And the outcome of your life is determined entirely by which of the two wins that battle. If fear wins, you live a small, safe life. You avoid risks that might hurt you. You never attempt what you might fail at. You remain in a comfort zone that slowly turns into a prison. But if desire wins, if it burns so intensely that it incinerates every fear in its path, you live a completely different life. One where you attempt what terrifies you, where you risk what matters, where you fail spectacularly and get back up to try again. And only in that life, the life where desire overcomes fear, is greatness possible. Marcus Aurelius wrote something about this that should light a fire in you. Do you have reason to complain about your circumstances? Most of us do, but you have just as much reason not to complain. The choice is yours. He was pointing to something critical. You will always have reasons to be afraid. Circumstances justify fear. Risk is real. Failure is possible. But you will also always have reasons to desire something greater. And the question is not which set of reasons is more valid. The question is, which set do you choose to feed? Because fear and desire are both fed by attention. Every time you ruminate on what could go wrong, you feed fear. Every time you visualize what you want to achieve, you feed desire. And whichever you feed more grows stronger until eventually one consumes the other. Seneca observed this in people who lived lives of unrealized potential. It was not that they lacked ability. It was that their fear of failure was stronger than their desire for success, so they never tried with the intensity success requires. That is the tragedy of most people. It is not that they are incapable, it is that they are terrified. Terrified of being judged. Terrified of failing publicly. Terrified of discovering that maybe they are not as special as they told themselves they were. And that fear paralyzes them in a mediocrity where they never fail spectacularly, but also never achieve anything exceptional. Epictetus taught something radical about this. If you fear pain and death, fear already owns you. But if you desire something strongly, that desire frees you from fear, because there is something more important than your comfort. That is the key. You do not eliminate fear. You overpower it with a stronger desire. Fear remains. It is still real. It is still valid. But when your desire burns hotter, fear becomes irrelevant. It does not disappear. It simply stops controlling your actions. Because there is something you want more than you fear the consequences of pursuing it. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every morning. Before getting out of bed, he reminded himself why he existed, what his purpose was, as an emperor-philosopher. And that reminder of his central desire, of what he wanted to accomplish before dying, made him rise despite all the valid fears he faced. Fear of war, fear of betrayal, fear of failing in massive responsibilities. All of those fears were real and rational, but his desire to fulfill his duty, to live according to Stoic principles, to be an emperor worthy of respect, that desire burned stronger. So he rose. And he did the terrifying work anyway. He wrote something specific about that process. At dawn, when you struggle to get out of bed, remind yourself, I rise to do the work of a human being. Not, I rise because I feel inspired, but I rise because my purpose matters more than my comfort. That is the difference between motivation based on feeling and obsession based on burning desire. Motivation says, I'll do it when I feel good doing it. Obsession says, I'll do it even when I feel terrible, because my desire is stronger than my fear or my discomfort. Requestion parabs. Seneca also warned specifically against waiting for fear to disappear before acting. If you wait to be without fear, you will wait forever. Fear does not vanish. You pass through it by acting despite its presence. That is the liberating truth. You do not need to be fearless to act. You need to want the outcome more than you fear the process. And when that desire is genuinely stronger, you act with fear present, but without fear stopping you. The practice that reveals whether your desire is stronger than your fear is brutally simple. Identify the most terrifying action you know you need to take to reach your goal. That difficult conversation, that significant risk, that attempt where public failure is possible. Now ask yourself honestly, do I want the outcome more than I fear the consequences? If the answer is yes, but you still have not acted, your desire is not stronger than your fear. You only think it should be. If the answer is yes, and you have already acted despite the fear, your desire truly surpasses your fear. But for most people, the honest answer is, I want the outcome, but not enough to go through the fear that stops me. And that is the critical revelation. It is not that you are incapable. It is that your desire does not burn hot enough. Epictetus taught how to deliberately intensify desire. Constantly visualize what you want to achieve. Make it so vivid that you can see it, feel it, almost touch it. Then ask yourself what you are willing to sacrifice to reach it. That constant visualization feeds desire. And when desire is fed consistently while you stop feeding fear through endless rumination about what could go wrong, the balance shifts. Desire eventually overpowers fear. And when it does, you become unstoppable. Not because you have no fear, but because you have something you want more than what you fear. Marcus Aurelius summarized this with devastating clarity. What is not good for the hive is not good for the bee. Stop worrying about yourself and concern yourself with your duty. When your desire is bigger than you, when it serves something more important than your personal comfort, personal fear becomes irrelevant. Because something is at stake that matters more than whether you feel comfortable or not. And that desire, which transcends personal comfort, is exactly the kind of desire that overcomes any fear. Seneca closed this lesson with a final question. What is worth fearing when death is inevitable anyway? If you are certainly going to die, why die without having attempted what you truly wanted? That perspective on mortality dissolves artificial fears. If the worst possible outcome, death, is eventually guaranteed, what exactly are you protecting by avoiding risk? Temporary comfort? A fragile ego? The opinions of people who will forget your name within a generation? None of those things are worth the price of an unlived life. And when you recognize that, When you truly internalize your mortality, fear loses its power. Not because it disappears, but because something more important takes its place. Living fully before dying inevitably. And living fully requires that your desire burns stronger than any fear that tries to extinguish it. That burning desire, that obsession, that incinerates fear on the path toward what you truly want, is exactly the power you need, not to eliminate fear, but to make it irrelevant through a stronger desire. And when you achieve that, when your desire finally overcomes your fear, you discover something liberating. You can do anything, not because you are fearless, but because you finally want something more than you fear. Sixth Stoic lesson: failure only destroys those who are not obsessed. There is an absolute difference between how failure affects the obsessed and how it affects those who are merely interested. For the interested person, failure is confirmation that they never should have tried. It is evidence that it was not meant for them. A signal from the universe that they should attempt something safer. One failure discourages them. 2 failures stop them. 3 failures convince them it is impossible, and they quit. Not because it is impossible, but because their interest was not strong enough to survive inevitable failure. But for the obsessed, failure is something entirely different. It is not confirmation of impossibility. It is information about what does not work. It is not a reason to stop. It is a reason to adjust and continue. It is not the end of the road. It is a necessary part of the road. Marcus Aurelius wrote something about failure that shatters the modern narrative that failure is bad. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is not empty motivational poetry. It is a precise description of how real progress works. Every failure reveals exactly what you need to learn, change, or develop in order to eventually succeed. Without that failure, you would not have that information. So failure is not an obstacle separate from success. It is the process by which success is reached. And as long as you see failure as an enemy rather than a teacher, it will continue to destroy you. Epictetus lived this truth literally. He was born a slave, a form of failure most people would consider definitive. It was completely outside his control, completely unjust, completely devastating to any hope of a meaningful life. But it did not destroy him, because he was obsessed with philosophy. And that obsession meant that every circumstance, including slavery, became an opportunity to practice Stoic principles. He could not control his status as a slave, but he could control his mind, his character, his response to circumstances. So he obsessed over perfecting exactly those things, the only things he truly controlled. Eventually, he was freed. He became one of the most influential philosophers in Roman history. He taught senators, powerful men, and future emperors, all because the massive failure of being born a slave did not destroy him. It educated him, strengthened him, turned him into precisely the kind of philosopher who could teach the difference between real control and illusion. He wrote something about failure that should completely change how you see it. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about things. Failure does not destroy you. Your interpretation of failure as final devastation destroys you. When you change that interpretation, when you see failure as information rather than a verdict, everything changes. You are no longer terrified of failing, because you know failure only means, "This didn't work. I'll try differently." It does not mean I am incapable. It does not mean I should quit. It means nothing except that you learned one way that does not work, and that information is valuable, often more valuable than easy success. Seneca observed this difference in people who collapsed after their first failure versus those who grew stronger. Fire tests gold, adversity tests strong men, and failure separates those who truly desire something from those who only claim they do. The one who truly desires something cannot be stopped by failure. Each failure is simply an obstacle to navigate, not a reason to abandon the goal entirely. But the one who only says they want something, the one who is merely interested, uses the first failure as a perfectly acceptable excuse to quit. I tried, and it didn't work. It wasn't for me. That narrative protects the ego, because it avoids admitting, I didn't want it enough to continue after failing. Instead, blame is shifted to external forces. It wasn't for me. The universe said no. It wasn't meant to be. But the obsessed person does not have the luxury of those comforting stories, because obsession does not accept no as a final answer. It only accepts not yet as temporary feedback. The practice that reveals whether you are obsessed or merely interested is brutally simple. Count how many times you have failed at your current goal. If the answer is none or once, you probably have not tried hard enough. Failure is inevitable when you attempt something meaningful. If the answer is a few times and I stopped, you were interested, not obsessed. If the answer is many times and I am still going, you are genuinely obsessed. Because the obsessed do not count failures as reasons to stop. They count them as evidence of how much they have learned. Marcus Aurelius also practiced deliberately reframing failure. Whenever something did not go as planned, he asked himself, what can I learn from this that will make me better for the next attempt? Not, why am I so incapable? Not, should I quit? But what valuable information did I just receive through this failure? That question transforms failure from devastation into education. And when failure becomes education, it cannot destroy you. It can only make you more capable. Seneca also warned specifically against avoiding failure altogether. He who has never experienced adversity does not know himself. Prosperity does not reveal character, adversity does. Translated, if you never fail, you never discover how strong you truly are. You never develop the resilience that comes only from being knocked down and getting back up. You never build the unshakable confidence that comes from failing repeatedly and realizing you can survive. So avoiding failure does not protect you. It deprives you of exactly what you need to accomplish something great. Epictetus taught his students to seek failure deliberately. Practice what you fear. Expose yourself to what you avoid. Only by passing through it will you discover it was not as devastating as you imagined. This may sound masochistic, but it is profoundly wise. When you deliberately practice failing at small things, when you expose yourself to rejection, criticism, attempts likely to fail, something transformative happens. You discover that failure does not kill you. It does not destroy your worth as a person. It does not confirm your worst fears about yourself. It simply is an experience, one you can survive and learn from, and that realization destroys the power that fear of failure had over you. Because it is no longer an abstract terror of the unknown. It is a concrete experience you have already lived through and survived. And if you survived it once, you can survive it again, and again, and again. until failure completely loses its ability to stop you. Marcus Aurelius also recognized that some people are destroyed by failure, not because failure is devastating, but because they lack a purpose strong enough to justify continuing. If you have no constant direction, you cannot keep a steady course. He who changes direction with every wind never reaches any harbor. That lack of constant direction is exactly why failure destroys most people. They do not have a real obsession. They have an interest that changes when things become difficult. So when they fail, they simply find a new interest and abandon the old one. And they never develop the depth, mastery, or exceptional achievement that comes only from prolonged obsession with one thing. Seneca observed this in people who lived lives of shallow interests. They are everywhere but nowhere deeply. They know 1,000 things superficially, but master none. And at the end of their lives, they have nothing but a collection of abandoned beginnings. Epictetus and Cruprasses. That is the life of the interested person changing direction with every failure, versus the obsessed person failing 1,000 times in the same direction and eventually achieving a mastery the interested will never know. Epictetus closed this lesson with a critical distinction. It is not that failure is bad. It is that most people fail at things that do not matter and quit at things that do matter. Reverse that ratio, and your life changes. That reversal is exactly what the obsessed practice. They fail constantly at the one thing that truly matters, and keep going until they succeed. Versus the interested, who avoid failing at the one thing that matters, and as a result, never fail, but also never succeed. Because real success requires passing through inevitable failure. There is no path around it, only a path through it. And anyone unwilling to endure repeated failure is automatically disqualified from any exceptional achievement. Marcus Aurelius summarized this with characteristic clarity. Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impediment to our intentions or dispositions, because we can adapt and adjust. The mind adapts and turns obstacles into its own purpose. That adaptation, turning the obstacle into the path, is exactly the process of learning from failure. And only the obsessed practice that conversion consistently. The interested see the obstacle and look for a different path. The obsessed see the obstacle and turn it into the path itself. Seneca closed his teachings on failure with a liberating truth. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that things are difficult. And daring means being willing to fail, repeatedly, publicly, spectacularly, without being destroyed by those failures, because your obsession is stronger than any single failure. That is the sixth lesson. Failure only destroys those who are not obsessed enough to survive it and learn from it. And if your failures are destroying you, the question is not, how do I avoid failing? The question is my obsession truly strong enough? Because if it is, no failure can stop you. It can only educate you on the path toward your inevitable success. Seventh Stoic lesson. Solitude is the territory of the exceptional. There is a price to exceptionalism that no one warns you about. It is not hard work. It is not sacrifice. It is not constant discomfort. It is solitude. The solitude of pursuing something no one else understands, of working on something no one else values, of being obsessed with what the majority considers irrelevant or impossible. That solitude is not accidental. It is structural, because exceptional literally means to be the exception. And exceptions, by definition, stand alone, because the majority is comfortable in the ordinary. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by thousands in his imperial palace, wrote something about the solitude of the exceptional. He who lives in harmony with himself lives in harmony with the universe. But few live in harmony with themselves. Therefore, whoever does is often alone among multitudes. That is exactly the experience of the obsessed. You can be surrounded by people, but if no one shares your obsession, if no one understands why you sacrifice what you sacrifice, you are fundamentally alone. Not because you are antisocial, but because you are the exception in a world of conformists. And exceptions do not find companionship among those who chose to conform. Seneca lived this reality literally. He was exiled from Rome, separated from everything familiar, forced to live alone on a remote island. And in that exile, in that enforced solitude, he wrote some of his deepest works, not because solitude was comfortable, but because solitude eliminated every distraction that stood in the way of his most important work. He wrote something specific about that process. The crowd proves nothing. Truth is often held by the few, and if you have truth on your side, solitude is better company than 1,000 who do not understand. That is the reality you must accept if you pursue a genuine obsession. Most people will not understand, not because they are stupid, but because they do not share your vision. And without sharing the vision, they will never understand why you sacrifice what you sacrifice. So they will judge you, criticize you, tell you that you are taking it too far. And you have two options. Endlessly justify yourself to people who will never understand, or accept solitude as the necessary price of exceptionalism. Epictetus taught something radical about this. If you want to improve, you must be content to be thought foolish and ignorant in external matters. Because the path to true mastery requires prioritizing things most people consider irrelevant. Practicing your craft when you could be socializing, studying when you could be resting, working when you could be entertained. Each of those choices separates you from the crowd, and the more consistently you make them, the more solitary you become. Not because you reject people, but because your priorities no longer align with the majorities. They value comfort. You value growth. They value entertainment. You value mastery. They value social approval. You value progress toward your vision. Those fundamental differences in values create a distance that no amount of forced socializing can close. The practice that reveals whether you are willing to accept necessary solitude is uncomfortable. Count how many people in your life genuinely understand your obsession, not people who tolerate it, not people who nod politely when you talk about it, but people who truly understand why it matters so much to you that you sacrifice other things. If the honest answer is few or none, you have entered the territory of the exceptional. And you have a choice. Dilute your obsession to fit in better, or accept solitude as your companion on the path to excellence. Marcus Aurelius also recognized that solitude is not the absence of people, but the absence of shared understanding. You can be alone in the middle of a crowd if no one understands what you value. That solitude among multitudes is often more painful than physical solitude, because you are surrounded by people yet fundamentally disconnected from them. They talk about things that do not matter to you. They value things you consider superficial. They live lives you could not tolerate living. And the deeper you go into your obsession, the wider that gap becomes. not because you become arrogant, but because you have simply evolved in a different direction. Seneca also warned that trying to maintain connections with people who do not share your vision is exhausting. It is better to be alone than in bad company. But many prefer bad company to solitude because they fear being alone more than they value peace. That is the trap. You maintain relationships that drain you because you fear solitude. You tolerate shallow conversations because they feel better than silence. You participate in activities that do not matter to you because they feel better than being alone with your work. But that tolerance has a massive cost. Every hour spent in company that does not nourish you is an hour not spent on the work that does matter. Every shallow conversation is energy not invested in your obsession. And at the end of the day, you have sacrificed progress toward your vision just to avoid the temporary discomfort of solitude. Epictetus taught his students to embrace solitude deliberately. Withdraw into yourself often, but let that withdrawal not be escapism, but focus. Use solitude to work on what truly matters, without the distraction of those who do not understand. That deliberate solitude is not misanthropy. It is protection of your most valuable resource, focused time and energy. Because when you are alone, you can work without interruptions, without explanations, without pressure to conform to social expectations. Just you and your work. And that simplicity is exactly where the magic happens. Marcus Aurelius practiced this intentionally. Despite his massive responsibilities as emperor, he created daily time for solitude. Early in the morning or late at night, when no one demanded his attention, he withdrew into himself, not to escape responsibility, but to strengthen the character required to fulfill it. And he wrote about that process. Men seek retreats for themselves, houses in the countryside, seashores, mountains. But this is the mark of the ordinary man, for it is possible at any moment to retreat into yourself. No retreat is more peaceful or more free from disturbance than the soul itself. That inner solitude, that return to your own center, is possible even in the middle of crowds. But it requires practice. And it requires a willingness to be misunderstood by those who see you physically present, but mentally absent. Seneca also practiced deliberate solitude, even when he had access to Rome's most prestigious social circles. I prefer to be alone with my thoughts, rather than surrounded by people whose empty conversations pull me away from what truly matters. That preference did not make him antisocial. It made him selective. Selective about whom he spent time with. Selective about which conversations deserved his energy. And that selectivity is exactly what the obsessed must practice. Not because other people lack value, but because your time is finite, and your obsession requires a level of concentration that constant social interaction destroys. Epictetus closed this lesson with a critical distinction. Do not avoid all people. Avoid those who do not share your values. Actively seek the few who do. Because one true ally on your path is worth more than 1,000 superficial acquaintances. That is the solution to the solitude of the exceptional. It is not finding crowds who understand you. It is finding the few who genuinely do and building deep connection with them, while accepting that the majority never will. And being at peace with that reality. Marcus Aurelius summarized this perfectly. Consider often the interconnectedness of all things in the universe, but do not expect everyone to see the connections you see. Some see deeply, most see superficially, and both perspectives have their place. Accepting that not everyone will see what you see removes the need to be understood by everyone. You can exist in depth without needing superficial validation, and that freedom from needing universal approval is exactly what allows you to inhabit solitude without pain, because it is no longer the solitude of rejection, it is the solitude of choice. You chose depth over breadth. You chose the few who understand over the many who applaud superficially, and that choice, though solitary, is exactly the territory where the exceptional is forged. Seneca closed on this with a final truth. The crowd has played the role of the worst advisor. In every case, before trusting them, ask whether their advice brings you closer to the person you have decided to become. If not, the solitude of your own judgment is better company. That solitude of your own judgment, the willingness to be the exception without needing the majority's approval, is both the price and the power of exceptionalism. And only those who fully accept it can inhabit the territory where greatness lives. 8th Stoic lesson: control only your effort, not the outcome. There is a paradox that destroys most obsessed people before they ever achieve anything meaningful. They become obsessed with a specific outcome, a specific victory, a specific form of recognition. And when that outcome does not arrive despite massive effort, they collapse. I worked so hard and it didn't work. What was the point? That question reveals the fundamental mistake: obsession with the outcome instead of obsession with the process. And that mistake is exactly what the Stoics identified as the source of unnecessary suffering more than 2,000 years ago. Because there are things you control and things you do not control, and your obsession must live entirely in what you control, not in what you do not. Marcus Aurelius articulated what is known as the dichotomy of control. You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That sentence is not abstract philosophical comfort. It is precise instruction on where to place your obsession. You do not control whether you win. You control how hard you train. You do not control whether you are recognized. You control the quality of your work. You do not control the market. You control your preparation for opportunities when they appear. And when you obsess over what you control instead of what you do not, something transformative happens. You become unstoppable, not because you guarantee the outcome, but because you eliminate the one thing that stops most people, the despair that comes from working hard and not seeing the desired result. If your obsession is the outcome, every day without that outcome feels like failure. But if your obsession is effort, every day you give your maximum effort is a successful day, regardless of external results. Epictetus taught this with brutal clarity. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Up to us are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, in short, whatever is our own doing. Not up to us are the body, property, reputation, position, in short, whatever is not our own doing. That distinction is absolute. It is not philosophical nuance. It is a hard line, separating what deserves your obsession from what does not. Your effort, completely under your control, it deserves total obsession. The outcome of that effort, not fully under your control, it does not deserve obsession. And when you internalize that distinction, when you truly live it, you free yourself from the anxiety that destroys those obsessed with outcomes. Because you are no longer gambling your peace of mind on something you cannot fully control. You are building your identity around something you can control completely, your unbreakable commitment to maximum effort. Seneca observed this difference in athletes who endured pressure versus those who collapsed under it. The one obsessed with victory collapses when victory slips away. The one obsessed with giving their best effort rises even in defeat because their standard has been met. That is the critical difference. If your standard is victory, then everything except victory is failure, and since you cannot fully control victory, you live in constant anxiety. But if your standard is maximum effort, then every day you give maximum effort meets your standard regardless of outcome. And that consistency in meeting a standard you control is exactly what eventually produces the results you do not control. Because results are a consequence of sustained effort, not of obsession with results themselves. The practice that reveals whether you are obsessed with effort or with outcomes is simple. Ask yourself, if I give my maximum effort for an entire year and do not achieve the result I want, will I consider that year wasted? If the answer is yes, you are obsessed with the outcome, and that obsession will make you miserable. Because you do not fully control the outcome, and you are placing your happiness in something outside your control. But if the answer is no, if you recognize that maximum effort has value independent of the result, then your obsession is correctly placed. On the process, on effort, on what you actually control. Marcus Aurelius practiced this specifically as emperor. He could not control whether his policies would succeed. He could not control whether his enemies would be defeated. He could not control whether the empire would prosper. Too many external variables, too many forces beyond his control. But he could control whether he governed according to Stoic principles, whether he made decisions guided by reason rather than emotion, whether he gave his best effort to every responsibility. And he obsessed over exactly that. Governing by principles, not by outcomes. He wrote something specific about this orientation. Do not ask whether your actions will succeed. Ask whether your actions are just. Success is outside your control, but the justice of your actions is entirely within it. That reorientation from outcome to process is exactly what made him one of the most respected emperors in history. Not because all his plans succeeded, many failed, but because his unwavering commitment to principle was visible in every action, regardless of outcome. Seneca also warned specifically against obsession with recognition. If you seek external applause, you will never have peace. Applause depends on the opinions of others, and the opinions of others are not under your control. That dependence on external validation is the trap most people fall into. They work hard. They do not receive the recognition they believe they deserve. They become bitter, but that bitterness comes from a misplaced obsession. They obsessed over recognition which they do not control, instead of obsessing over excellence, which they do. And because their obsession lived in something uncontrollable, they remained in perpetual frustration. Epictetus taught his students how to escape that trap. Decide today that you will not seek external approval. Seek only the inner approval of knowing you gave your best effort according to your values. That internal approval is the only form of validation completely under your control. And when it becomes enough, when you no longer need others to validate your effort, you become unbreakable, because your peace no longer depends on external variables. It depends only on whether you met your internal standard. Marcus Aurelius also recognized that controlling only effort does not mean being passive about results. Do everything in your power to influence the outcome. But recognize that after you have done everything you can, the final result is not fully under your control. That distinction is crucial. This is not passive resignation. It is not, "I don't care about the result." It is doing absolutely everything you can to create the desired result and then releasing attachment to the outcome because you ultimately do not control it. That combination of maximum effort and detachment from results is exactly the formula the Stoics practiced. And it is exactly the opposite of what most people do. Most people give mediocre effort while obsessing over outcomes. That is a recipe for miserable mediocrity. The Stoic gives maximum effort while releasing attachment to outcomes. That is a recipe for calm excellence. Seneca summarized this with devastating precision. Apply all your energy to action. Afterward, accept whatever result follows with equanimity. That equanimity is not indifference. It is freedom from unnecessary anxiety. Because you did everything you could. The rest was never under your control to begin with. So, if the result is favorable, good. If it is not, you adjust and continue, but you never collapse. Because your identity and worth were never tied to the result. They were tied to your unbreakable commitment to maximum effort, and that commitment remains intact regardless of external outcomes. Epictetus closed this lesson with the most liberating truth in Stoic philosophy. Freedom is not doing what you want, it is wanting only what you control. And when you want only what you control, you are completely free. That freedom, that unshakable peace that comes from obsessing only over what you control, is the true gift of the dichotomy of control. And only when you practice it, when you truly live obsessed with effort instead of outcomes, do you discover something paradoxical. Results improve dramatically, not because you are now obsessed with them, but because you no longer waste energy on anxiety about them. All your energy goes into effort, and effort without anxiety is far more powerful than effort contaminated by desperation over outcomes. Marcus Aurelius closed on this with final clarity. Concentrate all your attention on the task at hand. Forget everything else. The task at hand, fully under your control. Everything else, including final outcomes outside your control. And when you place your total obsession on the former while releasing the latter, you become unstoppable. Not because you guarantee success, but because you eliminate the one thing that guarantees failure. Quitting because results did not arrive when you expected. The one obsessed with effort never quits, because their standard is met every day through maximum effort. And that sustained effort eventually, inevitably produces extraordinary results. That is the 8th lesson. Control only your effort, not the outcome. And in that correctly placed obsession, you find the freedom that produces exactly the results you stopped obsessing over. 9th Stoic lesson. Obsession turns the process into the reward. There is a lie you were told about success that keeps you permanently dissatisfied. The lie that value lives in the destination, in the moment of arrival, in the final result. When I reach X, then I'll be happy. When I achieve Y, then it will all have been worth it. End quote. End quote. When I finally arrive at Z, then I'll be able to rest satisfied. But that mindset guarantees you will never be satisfied. Because when you reach X, you immediately need X plus 1. When you achieve Y, you discover Y wasn't enough, and now you need Y squared. When you arrive at Z, you realize there is an entire alphabet beyond Z that you never considered. And you live your entire life chasing a satisfaction that is always one achievement away. Marcus Aurelius wrote something about this that should completely change how you see your obsession. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. But he added something more precise about where satisfaction is actually found. Take joy in each action, each step of the way, not only in the final destination, which you may never reach. That is the devastating truth. The destination may never arrive. You can work your entire life toward a specific goal and die before reaching it. You can give everything to a particular outcome and discover that circumstances outside your control make it impossible. So if all your satisfaction depends on reaching a specific destination, you live your entire life unsatisfied. But if you find satisfaction in the process itself, in the daily work, in each step of the path, then you are satisfied every day. Not because you reached the destination, but because you love the journey. And that is exactly the difference between healthy obsession and destructive obsession. Destructive obsession hates the process. It only tolerates the work because it hopes for a future reward. I hate this, but I do it because one day it will give me what I want. That kind of obsession is miserable, because you spend years, maybe decades, doing something you hate, waiting for a payoff. And if that payoff never comes, or comes and doesn't satisfy as you expected, you wasted an entire life doing something you despised. Healthy obsession loves the process. The result is a bonus, not the primary purpose. I love doing this. And if it eventually produces the result I want, great. But the doing itself is already the reward. Seneca observed this in people who lived miserable lives chasing future wealth. They are not living. They are preparing to live. And they spend their entire lives in preparation, always one step away from actually living. That is the trap of destination-oriented obsession. You are always about to live, always about to be satisfied, always about to rest. But that moment never comes, because when you reach one goal, you immediately set another. So you never truly live. You only prepare endlessly for a future moment that never arrives. Epictetus taught something radical about this. Do not say, "When I have leisure, I will practice philosophy." Practice it now. Leisure may never come, and if you only practice when you have leisure, you will never practice at all. Translated to modern obsession, do not say, "When I reach my goal, I'll enjoy the process." Enjoy the process now, because the goal may never arrive. Or it may arrive and fail to satisfy you. But if you enjoy the process now, you live well regardless of whether the goal arrives. The practice that reveals whether you have turned the process into the reward is brutally honest. Ask yourself, if I knew with certainty that I would never reach the final result I am pursuing, would I still do this work? If the answer is no, you are obsessed with the destination, not the process. And that obsession will make you miserable, because you will spend years doing something you dislike, while waiting for a result that may never come. But if the answer is yes, if you recognize that the work itself has value independent of the outcome, then you have turned the process into the reward. And that transformation is exactly what separates sustainable obsession from obsession that eventually collapses into bitter burnout. Marcus Aurelius practiced this specifically as emperor. He did not govern because he loved power or the fantasy of a perfect empire. He governed because he loved the act of governing according to Stoic principles. Each difficult decision, each heavy responsibility, Each moment of choosing reason over emotion. That was the reward. Not future recognition. Not a flawless empire. The act of governing well today was enough. He wrote something specific about this orientation. In the morning, when it is hard to get out of bed, keep this thought ready. I am rising to do the work of a human being. Why should I complain if I am going to do what I exist for? Not, I rise to eventually reach a result that will make me happy. But I rise to do the work that defines who I am. And that work itself is my purpose. That orientation, work as purpose, not merely a means to a future end, is exactly what turns the process into the reward. Seneca also found satisfaction in daily philosophical work without obsession over future recognition. I do not write for future audiences. I write because the act of thinking clearly and expressing it through writing improves my character today. That process-focused orientation is exactly why his writing survived 2,000 years. Not because he chased immortality, but because he loved the process of thinking and writing without needing it to produce immortality. And paradoxically, that love of the process produced exactly the result he did not chase: lasting influence. Epictetus taught his students something specific about falling in love with the process. The carpenter does not build to be praised. He builds because he loves taking raw wood and turning it into something beautiful and useful. The act itself is his reward. When asked, "But doesn't he want his furniture to be appreciated?" he replied, "Appreciation is a pleasant bonus, but it is not why he builds. He builds because he cannot not build. The act calls to him regardless of recognition. That is the mark of healthy obsession. You cannot not do it. Not because you are destructively addicted, but because the act itself nourishes you. It makes you feel more alive, more yourself, more aligned with who you want to be. And that alignment is a daily reward no external result could meaningfully improve. Turning the process into the reward is not instant. It requires deliberate retraining of how you value your time. Marcus Aurelius practiced asking himself each night, "What did I do today that was worth doing? Not what result did I achieve, but what process did I engage in? What work made me feel alive? What action moved me closer to who I want to be?" That daily evaluation based on process rather than results retrained his mind to value doing over getting. And with enough practice, doing became enough. Seneca also warned against postponing satisfaction until a future result. He who says, "I will be happy when I reach X," will never be happy. Because when he reaches X, he immediately desires X plus 1. And the pattern continues until death without genuine satisfaction. That hedonic trap is exactly why people who achieve all their goals are often the most miserable. Their entire lives were structured around, "I'll be happy when." And when they achieved everything, they discovered devastatingly that happiness was never in the achieving. It was in the process they sacrificed, believing it was only a means to an end. But by the time they realize this, they have lost decades living unhappily. Epictetus closed this lesson with a liberating instruction. Find something you love doing so much you would do it for free. Then find a way to do it so well that you are paid for it. When the process itself is the reward, the payment becomes a bonus. That is the formula for a well-lived life. A process you love so deeply that it rewards you on its own, not work you tolerate for a paycheck, but work you would do even without pay because doing it completes you. And paradoxically, that kind of work is exactly what eventually pays the most. Because when you love the process, you naturally obsess over mastery, not because you need mastery for an external reward, but because improving at what you love is inherently satisfying. And mastery born from love of the process is exactly the kind of mastery the world rewards. Marcus Aurelius summarized this with characteristic clarity. Perform every act of your life as if it were your last. Do it with your whole soul, without reserve, without distraction. Not perform each act to eventually reach some future result, but perform each act as if the act itself were the entire point, because it is. Life is a collection of present actions, not an imagined future where you will finally be happy. And when each present action is done fully because the action itself is worth doing, you live completely, not someday, now. Seneca closed his teaching on this with a final truth. Live immediately. Do not postpone living until you achieve something. Everything you need to live well is available now, the ability to give your best effort to what you are doing. That ability, the power to love the process regardless of outcome, is the gift of the 9th lesson. When obsession turns the process into the reward, you no longer live waiting for a future to justify the present. You live the present fully, because the present, the act of doing what you love, is justification enough. And that life, lived fully in each moment of a process you love, is exactly the life worth living. 10th Stoic lesson: renounce your present for your future. There is a final tension in obsession that you must resolve. On one hand, I have told you to love the process, to find satisfaction in the present, to stop postponing life. But on the other hand, obsession demands sacrifice. Sacrifice of present pleasures for a future vision. Sacrifice of comfort now for excellence later. So how do you reconcile the two? Do you love the present, or do you sacrifice it for the future? The Stoic answer is both at the same time. And that synthesis is exactly the art of healthy obsession. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that captures this tension perfectly. Accept whatever comes to you woven in the pattern of your destiny, but accept it not as a final resting place. Accept it as training for the person you are becoming. That is the key. You fully accept the present, but you do not settle for it. You use it. You work with it. You extract every drop of growth it contains, and then you let it go so you can become something greater tomorrow. This is not a contradiction, it is a cycle. Total acceptance of the present combined with total ambition for the future. Seneca taught this specifically regarding pleasure. Do not avoid all pleasure that is destructive, asceticism, but do not chase all pleasure either, that is hedonism that keeps you stagnant. Instead, practice this. Renounce the pleasures that pull you away from who you want to become. Embrace the pleasures that move you closer. That distinction is critical. Not every sacrifice is virtuous. Some are merely masochism that serves no growth. Not every pleasure is destructive. Some are necessary for sustainability. The wise, obsessed person distinguishes between the two. They sacrifice the pleasures that compete with their obsession: endless entertainment, constant comfort, social validation that requires conformity. But they embrace the pleasures that nourish their obsession: rest that enables recovery, food that fuels performance, relationships that replenish rather than drain. The difference is not whether something is pleasure or sacrifice. The difference is whether it serves your obsession or competes with it. Epictetus practiced this specifically with food. He did not fast destructively until he weakened himself that did not serve his philosophy. But he also did not indulge in excessive feasting that did not serve it either. He ate what was necessary to keep the body functional for philosophical work, no more, no less. That precise calibration between excess and deprivation is exactly the balance the obsessed must learn. Not total deprivation that destroys you, not total indulgence that stagnates you, but strategic renunciation of what does not serve and strategic embrace of what does. The practice that reveals whether you are renouncing wisely is brutally honest. List all the pleasures you have sacrificed for your obsession. Now ask for each one. Does this sacrifice make me more capable in my obsession, or does it only make me suffer without benefit? If it is the first, the sacrifice is wise. Continue. If it is the second, the sacrifice is masochism. Reconsider it, because the goal is not to suffer for suffering's sake. The goal is to renounce strategically what competes with your growth. Marcus Aurelius also recognized that some renunciations are temporary while others are permanent. Give up the pleasures that compete with your development until your development reaches a level where those pleasures no longer compete. That is deep wisdom. Not every pleasure must be renounced forever. Some only need to be postponed. The athlete renounces certain foods during training, but can enjoy them after competition. The student renounces social life during exams, but can return to it afterward. The entrepreneur renounces stability during the building phase, but may eventually have both. Renunciation is not always permanent. It is often strategic and temporary. Seneca also warned against confusing sacrifice with virtue. It is not virtuous to suffer unnecessarily. It is foolish. Virtue lies in renouncing what must be renounced and preserving what must be preserved. That discrimination between necessary renunciation and unnecessary suffering is exactly what separates healthy obsession from self-destructive obsession. Self-destructive obsession renounces everything, including what is required for health and sustainability. Healthy obsession renounces only what competes with growth, while preserving what feeds it. And that distinction requires brutal honesty about what truly serves you versus what merely feeds an ego that wants to feel righteous through suffering. Epictetus taught his students to evaluate every sacrifice. Before you give something up, ask yourself, does giving this up make me stronger for my purpose, or only more miserable without benefit? If it is the first, renounce it without guilt. If it is the second, reconsider whether the sacrifice truly serves you or merely satisfies a story that says, I must suffer to achieve greatness. Because the truth is more nuanced. You must be willing to endure the discomfort that serves growth. But you do not need to seek suffering that serves nothing except a masochistic ego. Marcus Aurelius also practiced distinguishing between renunciations that brought him closer to his values and renunciations that merely made him look virtuous. Renounce pleasure when renouncing brings you closer to living according to nature. But do not renounce in order to impress others with your austerity. That is not virtue. It is vanity. This distinction is especially critical in an age of social media, where many people sacrifice publicly to impress. Real sacrifice is private, done without an audience, without documentation, without external validation. Performative sacrifice is public, documented, designed to impress. Only the first truly serves growth. Seneca also warned against giving up the present without a clear vision of the future. Do not renounce today for a vague tomorrow. Renounce today for a specific future you have clearly defined. That clarity of vision is what justifies present sacrifice. If you know exactly what you are building, exactly why it is worth the cost, then the sacrifice has meaning. But if you sacrifice vaguely to be better, without a clear definition of what better means, you are suffering without purpose. And suffering without purpose eventually turns into resentment. Epictetus closed on this with a final instruction about sacrifice. Give up voluntarily what you will eventually lose anyway. Everything is temporary. When you renounce voluntarily, you control the narrative of loss. This is profound wisdom. Everything you have, you will eventually lose. Temporary pleasures, possessions, even your body and your life. So if you are going to lose it anyway, why not renounce strategically now what does not serve? You control the timing. You control the purpose. You control the meaning. Instead of losing it later without control, without purpose, without having used that loss to build something meaningful, Marcus Aurelius summarized this with final clarity. All things are fleeting, both the one who remembers and the thing remembered. Use your fleeting time wisely. Renounce what will not matter on your deathbed. Preserve only what brings you closer to living well. That deathbed perspective instantly clarifies what is worth sacrificing versus what is worth preserving. On your deathbed, will you regret giving up endless entertainment to build something meaningful? Probably not. Will you regret giving up meaningful relationships just to work more? Possibly. That clarity about what truly matters at the end is exactly what guides wise sacrifices versus foolish ones. Seneca closed his teaching on sacrifice with a liberating truth. He who gives up everything except what is essential lives richly, because the essential is enough. Everything else was distraction disguised as necessity. That renunciation of everything except the essential, that deliberate sacrifice of 1,000 distractions for one obsession, is the price of an exceptional life. Not because suffering is virtuous, but because the clarity that comes from eliminating the non-essential allows a level of excellence that a fragmented life can never reach. That is the final lesson. Renounce your present for your future, but do it wisely. Sacrifice what competes with your growth. Preserve what nourishes it. And in that precise balance between renunciation and embrace, between sacrifice and enjoyment, you find the sustainable path toward an obsession that leads to greatness. The awakening that changes everything. You have reached the end of these 10 Stoic lessons on obsession as a virtue. And if you have been honest with yourself while listening, something inside you has probably shifted. Not because I told you something you didn't already know, but because I named truths you already felt yet were afraid to admit. That your obsession is not an illness, it is power. That invisible work builds the visible warrior. That you must kill the versions of yourself that no longer serve you. That discomfort is the non-negotiable price of transformation. That your desire must burn hotter than your fear. That failure only destroys those who are not obsessed enough. That solitude is the inevitable territory of the exceptional. That you control only your effort, not the outcome. That obsession turns the process into the reward. That you must strategically renounce the present for the future without sacrificing sustainability. Each of these lessons directly confronts the cultural propaganda that trained you to fear exactly what could make you exceptional. They told you that you need balance, The Stoics tell you that you need disciplined obsession. They told you that success should be easy if you find your passion. The Stoics tell you it requires passing through brutal discomfort. They told you that leaving when things get hard is strength. The Stoics tell you that staying in what no longer serves you is cowardice. They told you that seeking external validation is normal. The Stoics tell you it is a voluntary prison. And now a clear choice stands before you. You can return to the comfortable narrative, the one that says it's fine to live a balanced, comfortable, ordinary life. That narrative has an obvious benefit. It demands little from you. It doesn't disturb you. It doesn't force you to confront where you are, but it carries a devastating cost. You never reach your potential. You never discover what you are truly capable of. You never live the life you know, deep down, you could have lived. Or you can embrace the Stoic truth, the one that tells you obsession is exactly the power you need. That truth is uncomfortable. It demands everything. It forces you to confront every area where you have settled. But it offers a reward the comfortable life will never know: to live fully, to reach your peak, to die knowing you extracted every drop of potential from your one unique life. Marcus Aurelius, at the end of his life, wrote something that perfectly summarizes this choice. Of human life, the duration is a point, the substance is in flux, perception is dim, the composition of the body is corruptible, the soul is restless, fortune uncertain, and fame without judgment. In short, all that belongs to the body is a river. All that belongs to the soul is dream and smoke. Life is war and a brief stay in a foreign land. Posthumous fame is oblivion. What then can guide us? One thing only: philosophy. Translated into your life, everything is temporary. Your body will fail, your possessions will disappear, your fame will be forgotten. The only thing that remains is how you lived, the principles you practiced, the obsession you served. And when you are on your deathbed, no one will ask how balanced your life was. You will ask yourself, did I live fully? Did I give everything I had? Was I faithful to my obsession, or did I betray it for comfort? Seneca, who faced his own death with stoic calm, wrote about that final moment. It is not that we have too little time, but that we waste much of it. Life is long enough if you know how to use it, but most people do not know how to use it. They fragment it into 1,000 mediocre priorities. They waste it on things that do not matter, waiting for a future moment when they will finally live. They sacrifice it on the altar of opinions from people whose respect they never truly needed. And in the end, they realize life was long enough to achieve something exceptional if only they had had the courage to become obsessed. But by then, it is too late. Epictetus, who taught until his final breath, closed his teachings with a final instruction. Begin now, not tomorrow, not when you are ready. Now, because every day you delay beginning is a day you will never recover. That urgency is not anxiety. It is clarity about the reality of finite time. You do not have unlimited time to decide whether you will embrace your obsession. Every day that passes is one less day to build what you want to build. Every year you waste in comfortable mediocrity is a year you will never get back. And, at the pace most people move, they will reach the end without ever truly beginning. Because they are always waiting to be ready. Always waiting for the perfect moment. Always waiting for it to be easier. But that moment never arrives. Because the perfect moment is now, when you recognize that it is time. Marcus Aurelius would remind you one last time: do not waste the remainder of your life in thoughts about others. You have work to do, work that only you can do. And every moment you do not do it is a moment lost forever. That work is your obsession, the thing you know you are here to do. Not because someone told you so, but because something inside you knows it with a certainty that requires no validation. That certainty, that inner calling you have been ignoring or shrinking to fit in, is exactly what you must amplify. Not gradually, drastically, not someday when it's convenient, now when it is necessary. Seneca would remind you one final thing: live as if each day were your last, but plan as if you will live forever. That combination of urgency and patience is the exact formula for sustainable obsession. Urgency. Act today as if tomorrow is not guaranteed, because it isn't. Patience. Build something that may take decades to complete because you may have them. That tension between urgency and patience is the true balance of the obsessed. They do not delay, but they also do not burn out in an unsustainable sprint. They act with intensity today and prepare to sustain that intensity for decades. And in that synthesis of patient urgency, they build what others only talk about. Epictetus would close with the most liberating truth of all: you already have everything you need to begin. You do not need more resources, more time, or more preparation. You only need the decision to begin. And that decision is entirely yours. That decision requires no permission, no perfect circumstances, no universal understanding. It requires only this: deciding once and for all that your obsession is no longer your shame, it is your power. And from today forward, you live by that truth without apology. That decision, that internal declaration that becomes external action, is the exact dividing line between an ordinary life and an exceptional one. Not because obsession guarantees greatness, but because without obsession, greatness is impossible. And you were not designed for mediocrity. You were designed for something more. That greatness is waiting not in some distant future, but in the immediate present, waiting for you to finally embrace the one thing that will take you there. Total obsession with what truly matters. Marcus Aurelius lived this. Seneca lived this. Epictetus lived this. None of them were perfect. All of them failed repeatedly. All of them faced massive obstacles. But none of them abandoned their obsession. And that obsessive perseverance is exactly why we remember their names 2,000 years later. Not because they chased fame, but because they were obsessed with living by principle. And that obsession produced lives worth studying millennia later. Your obsession may not produce immortal fame. It probably won't. But it will produce something infinitely more valuable. A life fully lived at your highest potential. A life without the regret of what if. A life knowing you gave everything you had to what truly mattered. And that life lived obsessively in pursuit of what you love is exactly the life worth living. Seneca spoke the final truth of all this. It is not that death is bad, it is death without having lived that is the tragedy. Do not die without having lived. Do not die with your obsession still inside you, unexpressed, unrealized. Live now, obsessively, fully, without apology. Because your obsession is not your disease. It is your only path to the life you truly want to live. And it is time to stop justifying your mediocrity and start embracing your power. The power you always had, but were taught to fear. The power of obsession as a virtue. Use it now, completely, because the life you are waiting to live someday is waiting to be lived now. And every moment you delay is a moment you will never get back. Your obsession is calling. Will you finally answer? Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.